Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry it's been a week. Last week, obviously, with everything going on, I was quarantined to my room and I could not get here to do this, so apologies for that. Um, this week, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 23. 1 Samuel chapter 23 is a longer chapter, so I'm going to jump right into it. Starting in verse 1, we're going to read to verse 8, and then we're going to pray. Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah, and they rob the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and smite the Philistines? The Lord said unto David, Go and smite the Philistines, and save Keilah. And David's men said unto him, Behold, we be afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord yet again. The Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, and brought away their cattle, and smote them with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And it came to pass when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David to Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. And it was told Saul that David was come to Keilah. And Saul said, God hath delivered him into mine hand, for he is shut in by entering into a town that hath gates and bars. And Saul called all the people together to war to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. I'm going to pray and we're going to get into it. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day, dear Lord. Thank you, Lord, again for this opportunity to look into your word, to try and expound on what you've given us, the amazing book that you've given us, dear Lord. Lord, please give me your words, give me your wisdom, dear Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. So looking at these first 8 verses, we see a couple things. David and his men. David and his men were in Judah. They were hiding from Saul. If you look in the last passage, David gathered 400 men to him earlier in the chapter. And then everything that happened, if you remember the week before, David going to the temple, Saul coming to the temple and killing all the priests, and Abiathar being the only one that escaped. You see all that happen in the chapter before. And that just happened. David and his men saw the brutality of Saul. Just saw it very recently. And so they were hiding. It said that they were afraid in Judah. And it said, how much more then if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? If they did this, if they marched against the Philistines, they would be exposing themselves. They would save a city, sure, but Saul would know where they were. And Saul would come for them. And you see at the end of the chapter, at the end of that passage, at the end of the passage we just read, Saul called all the people together to war. All of them to go down to Keilah. Not when the Philistines were there. No. David protected the people from the Philistines. Saul called all the people to go to war when David was there. Because Saul was so blind to his real enemies because of his singular hatred for David. The Philistines were in Israel. They were robbing the threshing floors of Keilah. They were marching on Keilah. And Saul was blind to that because he was looking for David. And David goes and he saves part of Israel. And then Saul gathers the armies together. And then Saul marches on Keilah. Not because the Philistines were there, because David was there. So blind to his real enemies, all because of his singular hatred. And just shows, the further that you look at Saul's story, the more blind with rage you see him to be. And it's just amazing. And we're just in the first 8 verses of the chapter. And I do want to look at this, David's faith. David asked about God about going to Keilah, and God said, go. And David's men were afraid, as they kind of should be. Saul showed in the previous chapter he had no respect for human life. It didn't matter what class you were. David was seen at the temple talking with a priest, and all the priests died because of it. Every single one of them. And those were men of God. And Saul did not care. How much less would he care about the people David spent all of his time with? So David, I'm sure, was afraid for his men and for himself, and his men were afraid. But David went because God said he could go. And then we're going to keep up in verse 9. And David knew that Saul secretly practiced mischief against him. I really don't know how secret it was at this point, but, Bible. And he said to Abiathar the priest, bring hither the ephod. Then said David, O Lord God of Israel, thy servant hath certainly heard that Saul seeketh to come to Keilah, to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me up into his hand? Will Saul come down as thy servant hath heard? O Lord God of Israel, I beseech thee, tell thy servant, the Lord said, he will come down. Then said David, will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And they said, the Lord said, they will deliver thee up. And the people of Keilah, if I was David, I would have looked at them and like, y'all are fake. Because he came down, David came, he saved them, and Saul was coming next, and the people of Keilah would have delivered David after he saved them up to Saul, just like that. We're going to keep reading. We're going to get through today. We're probably going to get done a little bit early today. I'm very excited about the next chapter. I'm not going to go too much into it. If you want to read ahead, that's your prerogative, and like reading the Bible is always good. But next chapter is shorter, but it is one of my more favorite stories of David in the Bible. But verse 13, but we should probably get through this week before we start jumping into next week. Verse 13, David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah, and he forbare to go forth. And David abode in the wilderness and the strongholds, and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. This is amazing. Saul's a king, right? So Saul has a kingdom that he should be ruling, that he should be protecting. But what we're going to see here is Saul's negligence. Saul's incredible negligence to his own kingdom. I mean, he's supposed to be judging the people. He's supposed to be over the people, laying down the law or having mercy. He's supposed to be being a king. Instead, he's out there being a human hunter. He sought for David every single day. I don't know for how long this went on, but I do know for a period of time, Saul was away from the capital of his kingdom, away from where he should be where he should be protecting, where he should be overseeing, away from where his responsibilities were, off in this wilderness every day searching for David. And it wasn't just Saul. It was Saul and all of his army. Remember, David had 600 men with him. Him and his 600 men were scared to fight Saul. That makes me think that Saul had more than 600 men with him. And because these were men of war, men that were used to fighting at this point, men that had just gone against the Philistines and won, I'm going to say Saul had many more people than David had. And then we're going to see later in this chapter that Saul and his men compass David about, completely surround David. Sun Tzu's Book of War, The Art of War, is a very interesting tactical book. It's one of the first tactical books ever written. And it makes some interesting points. And it says, if you have exactly the same amount of men that your opponent has, it makes sense to meet them head on in battle. If you have exact same amounts, you have faith in your soldiers, faith that they are better because you trained them, and you should be able to face your enemy head on in battle. He said if you have 2 times the amount of men that your enemy has, then you can try to outflank them. You can meet them head on in crash from either side. And it would be wise, and they would be confused. And this is in Sun Tzu's Book of War. In order to surround somebody effectively, which you see happens to David and his men later on, you need to have 10 times the amount of people in order to do it properly. Because you think about it, if you surround somebody, that's great, but if you surround them with just one ring of people, then you're actually pretty weak on every single front. No matter where they turn, they can conceivably fight through and just get right out. And then you're in trouble because your forces are spread super thin. So in order to efficiently surround an opposing army, Sun Tzu said you needed to have 10 times the amount of people. David had 600 men. I think Saul had at least 6,000 men in the wilderness with him, searching for David. At least. And because it's Saul, and I'm assuming that he took most of his army, and you round up, I'm going to go further, and I'm going to say it was probably well over 10,000 men. I have no idea how many men it actually was. I can tell you definitely was more than 600, but I'm going to say it was most likely 10,000 men. That Saul, 10,000 of his army, and Saul were in the wilderness chasing David. What was he thinking? He had a kingdom. He wonders why the Lord had forsaken him, why the Lord had given the kingdom to David next. He wonders why all that has happened. Maybe while he was in the wilderness with at least 10,000 of his men trying to hunt David down, it might have struck him, hey, I wonder what's going on in my capital city. Hey, I wonder what's going on in my kingdom. Because every day he's out here chasing David, trying to kill David. Because his hatred for him was so blinding. Saul's negligence. It's amazing. And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life. And David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David into the wood, and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find him. And thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee. And that might also Saul my father know. And they made a covenant before the Lord, and David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went into his house. Then came up the Ziphites to Saul to Gibeah. Doth not David hide himself with us in the strongholds in the wood, with the hill of Hekiah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of thy soul. Come down, our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. I'm going to stop again. If you remember, just recently we had an entire lesson pretty much devoted to Jonathan. And I honestly couldn't remember if Jonathan and David ever saw each other again after that chapter. We see here that they do. And they make another astounding covenant that is a testament to their friendship. Jonathan had agreed to be David's second. Jonathan said to David, You will be the next king over Israel, and I will be next unto thee. And this is where you see Saul's not only ruined his own life, he ruined his family's life. Jonathan never got that dream. David never got that dream of David ruling the kingdom and Jonathan, his best friend, next to him. That dream never came to pass. That promise never happened. Because Saul, later on, we're going to see it, we're going to get more in depth in it. Saul went to battle. And in Saul's final battle, him and Jonathan both fell and both died. And that battle only took place, and we're going to see it later, and we're going to talk about it way more in depth then. But that battle only took place because Saul was foolish. Saul didn't follow God's commands. And Saul starts doing more and more things that just make you go, what are you doing? And this is the start of it. I mean, last chapter, he killed all the priests in that how many was it? I can't remember. 85 persons that did wear a linen ephod. 85 men of God. Killed 85 men of God, just like that. Because David had been seen talking to one of them. And now we just see the more and the more Saul abandoning his own kingdom with many multitudes of his own soldiers. And then we see this next part. David's people are literally trying to deliver David up into Saul here, and it's just not working. Verse 20 again. Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of thy soul. Come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. And Saul said, Blessed be ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. Saul still thinks, he said earlier, the Lord hath delivered David into my hand. And then he said, Blessed be ye of the Lord. Like he has a relationship with God still. Like that God would deliver the next anointed king of Israel to his hand. Because he was just so blind by his hatred. Go, I pray ye, prepare yet, and know, and see his place where his haunt is, and who hath seen him there. For it is told to me that he dealeth very subtly. See therefore, and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hideth himself. Come ye again to me with the certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall come to pass, if he be in the land, that I will search him out throughout all the thousands of Judah. And they arose and went to Ziph before Saul. But David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the plain on the south of Jeshimon. And the further I go into this chapter, the more I see how Saul just went crazy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Saul, if you remember at the beginning of his reign, he was a good king. He was a good king. He united Israel. He brought all of Israel together. Yes, they were Israel, but they were 12 tribes. And what happened to one tribe really didn't affect anybody else. There was no unity to Israel. And Saul brought the nation together. And he was a good king. And then he made a mistake. He made a mistake. Mistakes happen. People make mistakes. He made a costly one. And then he made another mistake. And that's when you saw 1 Samuel 15. Right before the chapter that we get into the life of David. Saul had the kingdom stripped from him. Stripped from him, stripped from his family. He learned that his son would not be king. And that started Saul's descent. And he still, even then, I don't think he was a bad king yet. 1 Samuel 17, he was with his men on the valley of Elah fighting Goliath. Fighting the Philistines. Sure, when Goliath came out, he cowered with the rest. But he was there on the front lines with his men. He was still a warrior. And then 1 Samuel 18, he goes into the city and the women are singing his praises. They are still singing his praises, but they're singing more praises to David. Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. And he started getting jealous. And that's where you start to see he really declines as a king. That's where you start to see it. He starts to try and kill David. He starts to try and kill David. He tried to kill David with a javelin. I think it was 4 times in total. He missed every time, which is amazing. David would have been one crazy dodgeball player. Then he tried to kill his own son. He tried to kill his own son. And all the time, David was trying to be a good servant. He was best friends with Saul's son. He was married to Saul's daughter. But none of that mattered to Saul. Saul said, "This is all your fault. I lost my walk with God because of you. I'm losing my family because of you. I'm going to lose my kingdom because of you." When Saul just stopped, if Saul just stopped trying to blame everybody else, I mean, if he stopped trying to blame David for all of his faults and just looked at himself and said, "No, it's me, it's me, it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. If Saul just stopped and said that and looked at himself and maybe tried to get right with God again, maybe Jonathan and David's dream would have come to be. Maybe his family wouldn't have been destroyed like they were. Maybe we would remember Saul to be a little bit better than he was. But Saul never stopped playing that blame game. For the rest of his life, for the rest of his kingdom, he would blame David for what he had done. You understand, when you don't have a walk with God, you can't blame that on anybody else. That's not what you get to do. It doesn't matter how many times you've been wrong. The reason that you don't have a walk with God is because you don't have a walk with God. And it's not anybody's right. If something happens, I'm sorry something happened to you. And if something happens, that still doesn't excuse yourself. Well, I'm angry with them, so that means I'm not going to talk to God anymore. That's not how that works. That's not what you get to say. You don't get to blame somebody else for not having a walk with God. And that's what Saul's trying to do. Saul had the evil spirit from the Lord to spend upon him. He didn't have to walk with God anymore. He didn't have the Spirit of the Lord within him anymore. And he said to David, that's your fault. When it wasn't David's fault. David just had a strong walk with God. And if Saul stopped trying to say, that's on you, this is your fault, I can't talk to God anymore because of you, Saul would and just stopped and said, God, help me. God, please come back. Forgive me. Any of that, Saul would have found a forgiving God, just as we always find. But instead, for the rest of his life, Saul would find himself poisoned by his bitterness. Always blaming David because God wasn't with him. And we're going to keep reading, and we have 4 more verses left in this chapter. And we're going to see God's protection of David continually. And Saul also and his men went to seek him. And they told David, wherefore he came down into a rock and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on this side, that side of the mountain. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul, for Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, haste thee and come for the Philistines have invaded the land. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore they called that place Selah Hemahelkoth. Yeah, that's a funny name. And David went from thence and dwelt in the strongholds at Engedi. Saul had David. And I honestly think if Saul pushed it and tried to crush David, Israel, as we know, wouldn't exist anymore because the Philistines had invaded the land, and the bulk of Saul's army was with Saul in the wilderness chasing David. The Philistines would have taken Jerusalem, and Saul would have lost his kingdom, and Israel would have lost its future. And we see this once again. God just protected David. Even when it seemed like David was for sure going to be killed, he was going to lose, he was going to die, him and his men were going to be slaughtered. God protected David. This little devotional that I started doing, it's been almost as much about Saul as it has been about David. And this chapter, I think in particular, it speaks to me. Because I've been angry before. I've been jealous before. And I will be angry again. And I will be jealous again. But if there's one thing that I can learn from Saul, because you can learn from just about anybody in the Bible. If there's one thing I can learn for sure from Saul, is that if I lose fellowship with God, it is nobody's fault but my own. God is always willing to and wants to talk to you. Amazing as that is, God wants to speak to you. And he wants to speak to me. And if something fractures that fellowship with God, that's on me. And when you have a fracture in your walk with God and in your fellowship with God, that will never be anybody's fault but your own. Well, that preacher, he said some things, and he just hurt me, and he used me, and he made me angry, and because of that, I can never talk to God again. That preacher might have done some wrong things. I'm not going to lie. Some preachers out there aren't what they should be. And that's terrible. That's truly, truly awful. But it does not change the fact. And that is, if your relationship with preacher, yes, the preacher preaches to you, and that should strengthen your relationship with God, but if your relationship with your preacher somehow gets cut off, it should not cut off your relationship with God as well. And if that relationship with God gets cut off, it is on you. And it is on you to rebuild that relationship with God. And Saul had his relationship with God. He cut it off. He made a mistake. People make mistakes. I make mistakes. But when he cut off his relationship with God, he said, "This is your fault." And while God was right there the whole time, and he never went back to having any sort of relationship with God, because he could never face the fact that he broke the relationship with God. He always was looking for it to be for somebody else's fault that he didn't have a relationship with God. And really, Saul just didn't have a relationship with God. Alright, I'm done. I'm going to pray. Remember this, no matter what happens to you, no matter what, people have tough lives. I get that. I get that. But no matter what, the relationship you have with God, that's on you. God will never do anything to break that relationship. Never will. God's cool like that. But you know, God won't make you get up and talk to him. That's on you. And if somebody makes you mad, people make me mad all the time. All the time. But if I let that cut my relationship with God off, that's on me. I'm going to pray. Let's go. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you, Lord, again for this amazing opportunity, Lord. I needed this one. I did, personally. God, please help me, Lord. Help me to never lose that walk with you. And if I ever do, Lord, help me to rebuild it. Lord, help those who are listening, help them to have been helped. You said that your word will not return void, dear Lord, and that's a promise I take dearly. Thank you so much, Lord, for this day. And again for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great afternoon. Hope to see you at church tonight.